There are billions of hours of video on YouTube. Nobody's perfect, but some people aren't even close. Literally. This includes some of the most beloved figures in all of history. They look great at first glance, but a closer look reveals the deeply flawed, kinda terrible people they really were. And that's hardly the most astounding statistic about the site, which has been the go-to destination for uploading and watching video since 2005. These folks from history were downright awful. Mahatma Gandhi, probably one of the 10 most peaceful men of all time, had a much bigger problem than the British ruling India. According to Gandhi biographer Jad Adams, writing for The Independent, Gandhi was actually quite the sex addict. He even left his dying father's side just to have sex with his wife. He was 15 at the time, she was 16, and the grief of abandoning his father caused him to abandon lustful love forever. Kind of. At age 38, he took an official vow of chastity, but regularly tested it in unusual, creep-tastic ways. That said, sometimes, you really want or need to have one of those videos on your own computer or phone. His preferred method was to sleep with women, while naked. That might sound to you very unchaste, and you'd be right. But when the topic of downloading YouTube videos comes up, there's a side subject that must be broached: is it legal? On the copyright front, as long as you're downloading a video for your own personal offline use, you're probably okay. But it was okay, because apparently nothing lustful happened. It's more black and white when you consider Google's terms of service for YouTube, which reads, "You are not allowed to access, reproduce, download, distribute, transmit, broadcast, display, sell, license, alter, modify or otherwise use any part of the service or any content except a. as expressly authorized by the service, or b. with prior written permission from YouTube and, if applicable, the respective rights holders." Watching YouTube videos offline through unofficial channels takes money from Google and video creators. There's a reason YouTube runs ads. People make a living this way. So, obviously, stealing video from YouTube is a big no-no. A middle-aged man simply slept naked with girls way younger than him, some as young as 18, and sometimes he would sleep naked with multiple young girls at the same time. If you want to share a video, YouTube and most other video sites make it easy, from embedding to emailing to sharing via social networks. You simply do not need to download a video most of the time. However, you have your reasons. If you must download a YouTube video, absolutely need to, just for yourself, and not for dissemination, and not to be a total douche nozzle, here's how. Note: this story is updated frequently as the tools involved change regularly. Some of those changes are not always pleasant, such as software so full of extras, it gets flagged as malware by antivirus tools. The same goes for the helper websites. A change in a site's ad network can also create issues with malware. To prevent this from becoming a laundry list of programs and sites that can download YouTube videos, we came up with a few rules for inclusion. Services must support 4K downloads even in the free version. Work with top 3 video sites: YouTube, Facebook, and Vimeo. Download entire playlists or channels in a batch on YouTube, at least with a paid version. Output to MP3 for audio or offer companion software that does so. Have an interface that doesn't suck. Not collect your personal data beyond your email address. Not contain malware. Nothing weird about that. Of course, this behavior wasn't acceptable for anyone else. In his mind, every Indian should practice strict chastity, to the point of never marrying. If there's even a whiff of it in the air, even a pup, it's out. The programs, services, and sites in this story are all free of spam, virus, problems as of this writing, but caveat emptor. If they must marry, they should never have sex with their spouses. His married followers, meanwhile, were segregated on his compounds, told to never have sex, and should take cold baths if ever they feel their mojo rising. Big time. That's the real Gandhi, great for Indian independence, bad for keeping the young women in your life company. Winston Churchill. We all know Winston Churchill for his efforts in fighting the Nazis during World War II. But as it turns out, he was a white supremacist who had way more in common with his enemies than history wants to let on. According to Richard Toye's book Churchill's Empire, young Churchill took part in what he called a lot of jolly little wars against barbarous peoples, in Africa, and believed they were violent against the British not because the Brits were invading their land, but because they had a strong aboriginal propensity to kill. Later, when he joined Parliament, Churchill advocated more war against minorities, claiming that, the Aryan stock is bound to triumph. Of the Kurds, who tried to gain independence from Britain, he said, "I am strongly in favor of using poisoned gas against uncivilized tribes. Especially if you're not really mentoring. Third-party software is where you will get the best control over downloading online videos. It would spread a lively terror. Jolly little wars, a lively terror." Who knew Churchill spoke exactly like a 1980s cartoon villain? Then there was Gandhi's quest to free India from British rule. Churchill didn't like that, calling for Gandhi's murder by elephant, shortly after he rose to prominence in the late 1920s. It wasn't just Gandhi, though. Churchill openly admitted, "I hate Indians. They are a beastly people with a beastly religion." He didn't mellow out as he got older. In 1943, in between rousing speeches about never surrendering, he refused to help India survive a severe famine that ultimately killed around 3 million people. Churchill blamed the Indians, saying it was all their fault for breeding like rabbits. No wonder President Obama didn't want that man's bust in the White House. Walt Disney. He created Mickey Mouse, so how bad could Walt Disney really be? Plenty bad, as it turns out. Typically, you paste the URL for the YouTube video you want into the program, and it downloads the highest quality version it can find. For videos in 1080p high definition, HD format, that's usually an MP4 file. He was more Wicked Witch than Snow White. As Neil Gabler exposed in his biography Walt Disney, The Triumph of the American Imagination, as summarized by Vulture, Walt certainly had his racist side, and not just because he let Song of the South happen. He was reportedly the kind of person to, in meetings, refer to the Seven Dwarfs as a n******** pile, which isn't just terrible, it doesn't make any sense. He also used terms like pickaninny in meetings, which was an old-time and offensive term for black children. For anything higher in quality, 4K and even 8K videos, the file format is typically MKV. In the past, YouTube videos were Flash-based, so your download was an FLV file, but those tend to be harder to play back. MP4, short for MPEG-4 Part 14 Multimedia Format, plays everywhere. Note that the MKV file, also called a matroska, is a container. The file could contain video utilizing any number of codecs inside. The foolproof way to play them all is to use the VLC media player for Windows, which plays everything. Don't ever use it. Then there was his issue with women. Read more about it below. As for the downloaders, here are the best options. Free. Windows, Mac OS, Linux. I've mentioned the VLC media player above because it's a fantastic tool for Windows users that plays back just about any media ever created. It turns out, it also has the ability to download YouTube videos, albeit in a convoluted way. As Ward Kimball, one of Disney's associates, said, he didn't trust women or cats. What's wrong with cats, pray tell? Then there's a letter Disney sent a woman named Mary Ford, who wanted work as an animator. Was she good? We don't know, but Disney didn't care either way. He rejected her outright, because women simply didn't do that kind of work for him. If you run into any problems with it, you may need to do a full reinstall of VLC and clear your cache to make this work. Copy a URL from a YouTube video, then open up VLC. In the letter's own words, women do not do any of the creative work. From the media menu select Open Network Stream, Ctrl+N, and paste in the URL. Click play. As that work is performed entirely by young men. For this reason, girls are not considered for the training school. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs appear on the letterhead, almost like they're mocking her for her silly woman chutzpah. Steve Jobs. If you own anything Apple aside from an actual apple, you owe a debt of gratitude to Steve Jobs. That said, he probably shouldn't be put on the lofty pedestal he so often is. He was ruthless. According to CBS News write-up of Alex Gibney, who created the documentary Steve Jobs, The Man in the Machine, Jobs was basically a jerk through and through. He fathered a daughter, but denied she was his, and so she didn't see him for years. When the video is playing, go to Tools Codec Information. He contracted Apple with Chinese factories, whose conditions were so bad they drove the workers to exhaustion. Several wound up committing suicide over the breakneck pace they were expected to churn out iPads and iPhones, among other devices. There was also an issue with Apple stocks, in that Jobs was allegedly illegally backdating them in hopes of cashing in. There is a box at the bottom called Source. Copy the URL you find in that box. Go back to your browser and paste the URL. It's a temporary web address and will expire eventually, in the address bar, and start playing the video. When questioned about it by the Securities and Exchange Commission, he first denied it, then said he had to ask Apple's board of directors for extra "thank you" stock, then later turned the blame on his chief financial officer. When you're viewing the video in the browser, you'll see an option to download the file to keep locally. However, it appears that VLC is only going to save your file as 1080p and not any higher, even if the original YouTube stream was available in 1440p or 2160p, aka 4K. That's how Jobs would admit something bad happened, by saying someone else did it. Caravaggio was a highly respected Renaissance artist. He painted Judith beheading Holofernes, for one famous example. He was also a murderer, which is less respectful. In 2002, Andrew Graham Dixon put out a Caravaggio documentary on BBC that, as recounted by The Telegraph, exposed why Caravaggio killed a man named Ranuccio Tomassoni. It's been long accepted that Caravaggio killed Tomassoni in 1606, but most thought it was due to an argument over a tennis match. It also won't convert video to other formats. Well, according to new evidence put forth by Graham Dixon, the issue wasn't Caravaggio being a bad sport, it was a woman. Specifically, a prostitute. To get those options, you need the desktop software below. 4K video downloader free or $15 for a lifetime license on 3 computers, Windows, Mac OS, Ubuntu Linux. Multilingual 4K video downloader, 4KVD, is frequently updated and features clear download links on the program's website. No ad traps here. The software does what it advertises in a simple interface, grabs videos up to 8K in quality and downloads to plenty of formats. Just copy a YouTube URL and click the paste link button to get started. 4KVD will even grab subtitles, entire playlists, and all the videos in a channel to which you subscribe. The sites supported are limited to the big names like YouTube, Vimeo, Facebook, and a few others, but covers most of what you need. It does display a large banner advertisement at the bottom to keep the lights on. In tests, I had to make a switch from MP4 to MKV format to get my test video to download in 4K. Apparently, Caravaggio had a woman named Philide Melandroni over for a painting session, and fell for her. Problem was, Tomassoni was her pimp, and Caravaggio took umbrage to this. He felt inclined to fight for her honor, which meant castrating Tomassoni. Roman custom, at the time, dictated that if a man felt his woman was being insulted by another man, he would cut the offender's penis off. It was a tough era. The problem, as it turned out, was that Caravaggio wasn't very good at castration. He grounded Tomassoni and attempted to sever his manhood, but either the victim moved, or Caravaggio was simply clumsy. Either way, it appears Caravaggio severed his opponent's femoral artery instead, causing him to bleed out and die. 4KVD snagged the 3-minute duration, 229.7 MB file for the movie trailer in about 1 minute and 20 seconds. 4KVD defaults back to 1080p HD, so I made the same switch when downloading an ultra-high-definition, 8K playlist. If you enable the Smart Mode and its presets, 4K video downloader can perform one-click downloads to your favorite format. So there you have it. Caravaggio killed a pimp by slashing an artery when he meant to slash his babymaker, and that's why they never named a Ninja Turtle ever him. Mother Teresa. It's borderline blasphemous to criticize Mother Teresa, or Saint Teresa as of September 4, 2016. Did anyone in history do more to help the poor and the sick? Yeah. If you want to download more than 25 videos at a time or subscribe to YouTube channels to instantly download the latest, that requires the paid version. She maybe wasn't that great. Playback of the resulting MKV files via VLC media player was flawless. The program itself has an option to extract audio to MP3 format, so you don't even need the 4K YouTube to MP3 companion software. Wink's YouTube Downloader free, Windows and Mac OS, Mac X YouTube Downloader. Digiarty's multilingual WinX claims to allow downloads from 300-plus sites with user-generated content, including adult sites. As reported by the Times of India, Mother Teresa's true motives were actually kind of selfish, with less focus on helping people and more on boosting the numbers for her own religion. Mother Teresa's missions, despite having tons of charitable donations at their disposal, rarely, if ever, actually helped poor, sick people become healthy. In fact, most of these places, according to a 2013 paper published in Studies in Religion, were dirty, short on doctors, low on food, and largely bereft of painkillers. Nevertheless, Teresa found the suffering beautiful, like it was making the world a better, holier place.
Perhaps the biggest selling point of all is the claim that there is no malware, adware, spyware or virus, 100% clean. It has a clean interface, but there are ads for Winx's premium service during install. Copy a YouTube URL even for a playlist and launch the Winx software. We know this because she said it to the famously anti-religious writer Christopher Hitchens, "There is something beautiful in seeing the poor accept their lot, to suffer it like Christ's passion." The analyzer checks all the options. The world gains much from their suffering. Naturally, this didn't apply to Teresa herself, who, according to Hitchens, would regularly get care at good, American hospitals when sick. Apparently, the world would have gained nothing if she suffered. But Teresa's true goal was to use her charitable efforts to convert people to Roman Catholicism. Remember how she invoked Christ's passion? That's because she truly felt that the poor, the sick, and the suffering were akin to Jesus on the cross. This tool tried to default to the 1920 by -1080 version in MP4. I picked the 4K version 3840 by 2160 pixels in Webm format, a subset of the MKV format. You can rename a WEBM file to a MKV and it'll work fine. In settings there are options to default to Webm at the highest resolution. You can set up a number of videos to back up before you even click the download button. The 4K 226.9 MB file took 2 minutes and 19 seconds to download. There are no options for downloading closed captions. That's another strike. But Winx makes up for it by supporting so many download sites and having a price equal to nothing. 5K player free, Windows and macOS totally free. 5K player is a lot more than a downloader, but it's got a heck of an integrated downloader. If they suffered as he did, in her mind, that would bring them closer to him. Promising no viruses, ads, or plugin requirements is a good start. It would seem she skipped the parts in the Bible where Jesus actually healed sick people. Martin Luther's claim to fame is his 95 Theses and the Protestant Reformation. It is, sadly, one of the few I tested that asks for a registration of your name and email. You have to do that to get the full download function across 300+ sites. However, you still nab 4K vids from YouTube without registering. When downloading, the program does try to hide some things. But apparently he felt just as strongly about Judaism. Paste in the URL for a YouTube video and the analysis engine runs and shows only a few download options. Click the gear icon, then the Show All button and scroll to see more, like AA4K 3840 by -2160 file in Webm format. In fact, he felt the religion was evil and should be destroyed because the sad truth is that Martin Luther was a huge, highly dangerous anti-Semite. In 1543, Luther published a book entitled On the Jews and Their Lies, about why Jews are, in his words, a rejected and condemned people who do nothing but lie and blaspheme and who needed to be saved from themselves. And by saved, Luther pretty much meant that good Christians needed to utterly destroy Jews' lives until they decided to convert. He offered up several things these so-called good Christians could do to convince the Jews that Jesus is the way. The 227 MB Webm test download took a painful amount of time, about 6.5 minutes. Grabbing playlists was possible, but you must adjust download settings one video at a time. Such niceties included burning down synagogues and bury-ing and cover-ing with dirt whatever will not burn, so that no man will ever again see a stone or cinder of them. Also, he called for the burning of Jewish houses, so they couldn't live anywhere either. The confusing interface makes it hard to go back to the other videos in the playlist. 5K Player also features DLNA server playback, so videos you grab can be watched on any devices that support DLNA, and it supports AirPlay for quick playback to supported devices. Pick a video in the library for a quick conversion to MP4, MP3, or even ACC, the audio format preferred by iOS devices. Their prayer books and religious writings should be confiscated, and rabbis banned from teaching anything, entirely because Luther felt the God he believed in would have wanted it that way. So now they're homeless and have no place to worship. What's next? Well, according to Luther, you then ban them from traveling on highways, because if they did so, they would commit usury, loan sharking. The player didn't like playing back the overly large 4K file, though, and experienced buffering issues. VLC didn't have any problem with the same file. But ultimately, there's a lot to like about 5K player, from the price to the features, especially if you look at them as extras on a downloader. But interface and playback issues may have you looking elsewhere. YouTube by Click $19.99 premium after trial. Windows only. YouTube by Click captures video from over 40 sites.
Before you even do the first download, you can use the dials on the interface to set up a preferred download format, MP4 video or MP3 audio, and a default download quality as high as 8K, even on the free version. Downloading a 229.6 MB MKV file in 4K only took 2.5 minutes, not bad considering the free version's 2 Mbps speed limit. Let them stay at home, wrote Luther, the same guy who just called for Jewish homes to be burned to the ground. You also need the premium version to download playlists and channels, do conversions, avoid ads, and get closed captions. One thing you can do on YouTube by Click that's unique is set it up so any time you copy a URL from YouTube, the program will auto-detect it and ask if you want to start the download. Finally, Luther advocated confiscating all their money, only giving it back to them, in an allowance, if they have, sincerely converted, to Christianity. Enter your account credentials for YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and a couple of other foreign sites to get instant private downloads. Do you want to avoid installing software? Video download helper sites do the download work for you, providing conversion and then a download link. You don't have to install anything on your PC. It can take a lot longer, depending on the size and quality of the video you want, but you can't beat the convenience. There are hundreds of these types of sites out there. It seems anyone with a modicum of coding ability has set one up. Such sites easily go from useful to suspicious, especially if they get popular and the proprietor sells out to make cash off your visits. It's sad but true. The beloved Martin Luther outright advocated fundamentalist terrorism. John Wayne's reputation as a badass man's man gets tainted real fast once you hear his views on anyone who wasn't white. Yep, the rough and tough cowboy was a full-blown racist. In a 1971 interview with Playboy magazine, Wayne admitted he didn't like African American people, or, the blacks, as he constantly called them, being in charge of anything because white people are apparently the only people who know what they're doing. If your browser or your instincts throws up warnings, avoid and move to the next. All of them do one basic thing: you give them a YouTube URL or other video site. If supported, they parse it, give you a choice of what size download you want, and provide a link to said download. All are free unless noted and work across all platforms. However, note that since our last update, I've deleted at least 3 helper sites we used to feature, one for adding some sexually explicit ads, one for no longer working, and one for going out of business to avoid getting sued out of existence. Vidpa free online video converter. Vidpa offers up the usual features, and supposedly works with 1,000 plus other sites. As he said in the interview, "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility. I don't believe in giving authority and positions of leadership and judgment to irresponsible people." He also railed against black people getting too many opportunities. He felt that Hollywood studios are carrying their tokenism a little too far, and that minorities should only get roles meant for them. It doesn't offer video-audio combo downloads larger than 720p MP4s. You can get the video alone as a 2160p Webm format if you desire. Add PA to the end of YouTube in a URL www.youtubepod.com to instantly get Vidpa running while you're on YouTube. Keepvid.ch. This site gets a high ranking on Google itself when you search for download YouTube video. It's got a simple interface for pasting in a YouTube URL. Like slaves, Wayne actually claimed to be inclusive because he had a black slave in the Alamo. To that, you might say, well, it's a start, but honestly, it's not. Wayne also had a problem with Native Americans. It also supports around 1,000 plus sites. Top quality for a video is only 1080p. In that same Playboy interview, Wayne opined that white people grabbing America from the Native Americans was good, because the Native Americans were hoarding it all for themselves. Seriously, I don't feel we did wrong in taking this great country away from them. It states up front it won't handle playlists or bulk downloads, but its $18.90 desktop client option called Vitus does, and it can handle up to 8K. Extensions. A browser extension can save you a step. However, you're going to run into some issues with downloading video from YouTube, especially if you're using Chrome as your primary browser. The Chrome Web Store, where you get Chrome browser extensions, is controlled by YouTube's owner Alphabet Google. Even an extension ostensibly for this purpose isn't going to allow YouTube direct downloads, because of Chrome Store restrictions. In general, with Chrome extensions, the download of any RTMP protocol video, protected videos, or streaming video isn't possible. You can use them on other sites with video, of course. Just not YouTube. Want to get around it? Get an extension that does not come from the Google Web Store. Some of the programs and helper sites offer an extension component and will spell out how to do the install without the assistance the Chrome Web Store usually provides. There were great numbers of people who needed new land, and the Indians were selfishly trying to keep it for themselves. It takes a ton of gall to call genocide victims selfish, but no one ever accused John Wayne of lacking the stuff. Charlie Chaplin, the beloved Little Tramp, Charlie Chaplin, wasn't nearly as goofy in real life. Here are a few. YouTube Video Downloader free, Chrome, Opera, Edge. Vivaldi YouTube Video Downloader from Add-on Crop is also on multiple browsers but with excellent side load capabilities to avoid the watchdogs in the stores. It puts a button below whatever video you're playing on YouTube, making it easy to grab as a video up to 4K or as an audio-only MP3. Video Download Helper free, Firefox, Chrome, Edge. Video Download Helper supports a huge number of sites, even those for adults. You'll know a video is downloadable when the icon for the extension animates when you're on the web page. In fact, he was downright predatory, particularly with little girls. 2 out of his 4 wives were under 18 when he married them, while another one was just 18, and he was in his 50s at the time. The only one over 18 was 22, but he married her after she claimed to be 17. Video Download Helper for Chrome has stopped working with YouTube, so it could get placement in the Chrome Web Store. You can get around that by using the Video Download Helper extension for Firefox. That's the opposite of a good look. But if it's somehow not skeezy enough that he simply married underage girls, how about the disrespectful ways he treated them? Take his first wife Mildred Harris, whom he married at 16 because he thought she was pregnant. The developer has a Kiva initiative page, where it prefers you donate funds to those in need, which has raised over $160,575. Really AI, she wasn't. She started getting movie offers, but Chaplin was an unsupportive husband, thinking she was too young to have any real talent. Bookmarks for YouTube free or $33 per year up to $133 per year for businesses. Chrome. This is a Chrome extension that actually works from the web store, because it doesn't let you download YouTube videos. Instead, Threely lets you mark the times you want people to see, and they are then saved and easily shared. The viewer goes back to YouTube and sees what you specify. Not too young for him to romance, of course, but too young for anything else. Then there's Lita Gray, whose poor treatment at Chaplin's hands was documented in her 1927 divorce papers, obtained by the London Times in 2015, and recapped by the International Business Times. It's not like saving a video for offline use whatsoever, but could be useful in certain circumstances. Mobile. Remember that problem of using Chrome extensions from the Google Web Store. You're going to have an even bigger issue when you want to download from YouTube using an Android app from the Google Play Store, where Google has an even tighter grip, and a paid YouTube Premium service that supports offline viewing. That said, with Android it is possible to install apps without going through Google. For example, Instube, free video and music downloader for Android, can only be found at Instube's site. Chaplin impregnated Gray when she was 16. He quickly suggested an abortion. When that failed, he married her, but treated her terribly. He would cheat on her with other young actresses, called her lowly born and greedy, according to the LA Times, paid little attention to their children, and would demand, as she put it, revolting, degrading and offensive sex acts, some of which were illegal at the time in California. Gray got $825,000 in the divorce settlement, dirtying Chaplin's name at the time. Of course, time heals all wounds, which is why you don't hear this story much anymore. Until now, anyway. Aristotle, the great Greek philosopher Aristotle, was a wise man for sure, but when it came to women, he was a total misogynist who had zero idea what he was talking about. According to Charlotte Witt's essay, Feminist History of Philosophy, in the book Feminist Reflections on the History of Philosophy, Aristotle held views of women that went beyond typical sexism. In his mind, women were hardly even human beings; at best, they were deformed men. For some reason, he decided that women have fewer teeth than men, they don't, rendering them incomplete, and even though they give birth, they contribute only matter and not form to the generation of offspring. In other words, they birth the kid, but only men can shape them into actual human beings.
Of course, that can only happen if the child is a man because, and these are his direct words, a woman is perhaps an inferior being. It seems like there was no perhaps about it in his mind, however. Does this make Aristotle less of a brilliant mind? Not at all, but it does show how imperfect of a mind he had, and that even the wisest among us can have glaring blind spots. Woodrow Wilson was an irredeemable racist. Woodrow Wilson is considered one of America's greatest progressive presidents, passing the first child labor laws, establishing the Federal Trade Commission, and codifying the 8-hour day. Wilson shored up antitrust laws, helped end World War I, and sort of supported women's suffrage. He was also severely racist. Before entering politics, Wilson was an academic who had written several books. In his A History of the American People, Wilson said of post-Civil War laws providing black Americans treatment equal to that of whites that the dominance of an ignorant and inferior race was justly dreaded. As president, he actually resegregated the federal government. According to historian Sheldon Stern, Wilson even personally fired all but 2 of the black supervisors in federal service, replacing them with white people. Download the APK Android application package file to sideload on an Android device. It was a menace to society itself that the Negroes should thus of a sudden be set free and left without tutelage or restraint, wrote the president. Find it in your device's downloads and click to install. During the post-war Versailles Conference, writes historian Lloyd Ambrosius, Wilson killed a proposal for racial equality in the League of Nations. The blockbuster, an epically racist, film The Birth of a Nation detailed the rise of the KKK. Not only did this cinematic love letter to the Klan get a private screening at the White House, the first ever, but the film opened with another Wilson quote, "There had sprung into existence a great Ku Klux Klan, a veritable empire of the South to protect the Southern country. Joseph, son of Jacob, made an entire nation into slaves." The Old Testament, and the Torah, it's complicated, is not exactly devoid of plot twists involving deception and betrayal, often from the supposed heroes. Take Joseph, son of Jacob and possessor of the not quite Technicolor Dreamcoat. You may have to go into your security settings and enable unknown sources. On iPhones and iPads, you'd think there would be no such restrictions since Apple and Google aren't exactly the best of pals. But on the apps I have tried, not only wouldn't they download from YouTube, they're not even available for long. Jacob had 13 children but favored Joseph. Joseph's jealous brothers sold him into slavery in Egypt, getting away with it by convincing their father that he'd been eaten by a wild animal. One of those apps said in its description, downloading from YouTube is prohibited due to its terms of service. Apple is ensuring that app makers play by the rules, even Google's rules. Chances are, the minute you find an iOS app that can download YouTube videos, it will get fixed or banned. The only real option is to jailbreak your iPhone and use sideloaded apps that download what you want. There are workarounds. One is using a free iOS file manager app like Documents by Readle. Use the Safari browser to visit a YouTube video, and use the share option to find copy link. Then go back to Documents, and use the built-in browser in the app to surf to a video download helper site. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love, and he eventually rose to a position of power, second only to Pharaoh. Joseph was in charge of the land and, having prophesied a famine, had accumulated great stores of food in preparation. Paste the link into the form, hold your finger down on it until you get the Paste menu to pop up. When the hungry Egyptian commoners came to him for food, he sold it to them. The site will give you the links to download, and you can save the file to Documents. When they ran out of money, he said, "Give me your livestock, and I will give you food." When they had no more livestock, they offered all they had left, themselves. Buy us and our land in exchange for food. Hold and drag the file up, until you're back on the main screen, then drag it to the Photos folder. You'll need to give Documents permission to access Photos the first time. We with our land will become slaves to Pharaoh. Joseph accepted, and all of Egypt, except the priests, was now the property of Pharaoh. Now, in all fairness, according to Genesis, the Egyptians were grateful. Joseph had saved their lives. And Joseph's family had joined him in Egypt by this point and ended up extremely prosperous, to boot. You can then access the video like you would any video taken on the phone or tablet, in the Photos app. Another workaround, go back to the desktop and try AnyTrans, $39.99
for a single computer, a file manager for iOS devices that has an integrated downloader supporting 900 sites, including YouTube and Facebook. It'll transfer the videos to the iPhone for you over the USB cable. But surge pricing food into literal slave wages is pretty terrible. FDR created American concentration camps. Franklin Delano Roosevelt regularly makes lists of greatest U.S. presidents. He was elected an unprecedented 4 times, which is now illegal, established Social Security, beat the Nazis, and, our personal favorite, ended Prohibition. And he did most of it from a wheelchair. Even if you don't pay for AnyTrans, the download option remains and is free forever. Want a truly unique way to download a video? Developer Anton Gera created the Upost extension for the Google Chrome browser to turn a YouTube video into an article. It grabs all the subtitles, in whatever language you prefer, and places them into a browser page with select screen grabs from the videos as illustration. However, some of FDR's decisions were less reasonable politics and more racist, anti-Semitic, and cruel. When he took office, the country and world was in the midst of the Great Depression. To help combat this, FDR decided he needed gold. All of it. So he took it. From everybody. Every person in the country, citizen or not, had to surrender their gold or face prosecution. If the video doesn't have subtitles, it's not going to work. The better the subtitles, the better the article. Of course, auto-generated subtitles come in like run-on sentences by someone who doesn't really speak the language. In 1936, Jesse Owens represented the United States at the Olympics in Germany, winning 4 gold medals. Owens was a black man competing in Nazi Germany but, as he said later, Hitler didn't snub me, it was our president who snubbed me. The president didn't even send a telegram. As thousands of European Jews tried to escape the coming Holocaust in Germany, FDR had them turned back, fearing, as Smithsonian Magazine reports, that they were spies. The most debated decision FDR ever made, however, was to lock up roughly 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II. Star Trek's George Takei, and his family, were interned for 4 years because, as he explained to Democracy Now!, we simply happened to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor. Henry Ford was an anti-Semite who inspired Hitler. Henry Ford was one of America's greatest entrepreneurs and innovators, a man who literally changed the world. He not only transformed the way people get around by selling cars everyone could afford, but Ford also revolutionized industry by creating the moving assembly line. As Construction Literary magazine said, more than anyone of the industrial era, it was Ford that created a clear middle class. Ford also hated Jews. As even the Henry Ford Museum says, Ford's anti-Jewish sentiments ran deep. He bought a local newspaper in 1918, the Dearborn Independent. 2 years later, the Independent began publishing Ford's anti-Semitic views. He would later publish his Jew-bashing articles together as The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem, which would go on to sell millions of copies and be translated into a dozen languages. Adolf Hitler referred to Ford in Mein Kampf as the only man in America uncorrupted by Jews, saying, "Only a single great man, Ford, to their fury, still maintains full independence." According to the former editor of the Dearborn Historian, Hitler gave an interview to a Detroit news reporter in 1931. The reporter asked Hitler about the large portrait of Ford the soon-to-be dictator had in his office. "I regard Henry Ford as my inspiration," was the reply. That probably explains why, as The Nation reported, Ford kept doing business in Germany during the war. John Lennon beat women. John Lennon was half of one of the greatest songwriting duos and part of one of the most influential bands of the 20th century. The Beatles had 20 #1 hits, 34 Billboard Top 10 songs, and some of the most recognizable tunes on the planet. Gifted as he was, Lennon, however, was not the greatest guy. Even aside from marrying Yoko Ono and releasing Imagine, John did plenty that should make even the most zealous Beatlemaniac blanch. Granted, John didn't grow up in ideal circumstances. On the other hand, That his dad left him is not an excuse for leaving his own son. That he physically abused his wife before leaving her is not only something he admitted to, he actually wrote it into one of the Beatles' better-known songs. I used to be cruel to my woman, I beat her and kept her apart from the things that she loved, is a line in Getting Better. As he explained to Playboy in 1980, I used to be cruel to my woman, and physically, any woman. I was a hitter. That John's first son, the one he abandoned, wouldn't hold his father in the greatest esteem seems obvious, but Sean Lennon, John's son with Yoko Ono, also had choice words about his dearly departed dad. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Sean said, I think his greatest achievement was recognizing that he was a macho hole and trying to stop it. Roald Dahl was a racist jerk. Roald Dahl created fantastic stories enjoyed by generations of children all over the world. His characters aren't merely beloved, many are household names. Unfortunately, Dahl's dark humor and comic violence so many of us enjoy, reflects something darker in him. The creator of Willy Wonka was such a wanker that his wife, according to the BBC, called him, Roald the Rotten. Aside from just being a jerk, he cheated on her constantly, with her best friend, even while she was recovering from a stroke. The Harvard Review of Latin America records Dahl's response to his editor instructing him to revise the illustrations for the BFG to avoid stereotypes and caricatures as, the Negro lips thing is taken care of. The famous Oompa Loompas were similarly edited in a new edition of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It didn't occur to me that my depiction of the Oompa Loompas was racist, said Dahl, but it did occur to the NAACP and others, which is why I revised the book. Weirdly, according to Dahl's widow, the character of Charlie was originally supposed to be a dark-skinned boy, not white. Dahl jumped the bigoted shark with his anti-Semitic comments, though. For the 100-year anniversary of Dahl's birth, the Jewish newspaper The Forward compiled the 5 most anti-Jewish statements he publicly made in, well, here's an excerpt, Hitler didn't just pick on them for no reason. Coco Chanel was a Nazi spy. Coco Chanel is one of the world's most influential fashion empires, named after the famous French designer who originally founded the company. Chanel liked the high life and was known to associate with British aristocrats, French politicians, and German military officers in Paris during the Nazi occupation. Nazi gear was pretty haute couture, after all. When war broke out, Chanel secured lodging at the Paris Ritz. After the fall of France, many Wehrmacht officers ended up living there as well, one of whom probably shared more than Coca's address. Not only was she in bed with a Nazi, but she was probably in bed with the Nazis. Coco Chanel was more than likely a spy for Germany. Snopes concluded that, the evidence appears to skew strongly in favor of Chanel's at least doing some information gathering for the National Socialists. Apparently as business-savvy as she was anti-Semitic, Chanel possibly also took advantage of the Nazis' anti-Semitic laws. A French documentarian told the Jerusalem Post that Chanel, with the help of the Nazis occupying France, went to great lengths to get rid of her Jewish associates. After the Nazis retreated from Paris in 1944, Chanel was under investigation as a collaborator, but a lack of evidence at the time prevented her prosecution. According to Newsweek, some historians have suggested that one of Chanel's high-profile pals, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, intervened on her behalf. Teddy Roosevelt wasn't so cuddly. Theodore Roosevelt is on Mount Rushmore, in between Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln. That's how highly Americans think of the president we know as Teddy. He passed food and drug safety regulations, started the American political tradition of environmental conservation, made the first workers' compensation laws, got the Panama Canal built, and won a Nobel Peace Prize. He was also a bloodthirsty nationalist and racist. Teddy Roosevelt was an unabashed Western chauvinist. He wrote in Winning the American West that, all men of sane and wholesome thought must dismiss with impatient contempt the plea that these continents should be reserved for the use of scattered savage tribes. Roosevelt believed in the literal supremacy of American civilization and defended practically any effort to expand that civilization. I don't go so far as to think that the only good Indian is the dead Indian, but I believe 9 out of every 10 are, he said in an 1886 speech. As such an ardent believer in the inherent superiority of America, Teddy encouraged American expansion overseas. When the U.S. defeated Spain and took the Philippines as a colony, Teddy was a vocal proponent for civilizing the Filipinos by force, resulting in horrific war crimes and hundreds of thousands of dead Filipinos. Che Guevara was a bloodthirsty executioner. Che Guevara is probably the only 20th-century revolutionary that people know by his face. A highly charismatic warrior who sacrificed his life fighting against imperialists, Che is an inspirational figure to many millions of people, which is kind of sad because chances are he'd want to kill most of the people wearing his face on a t-shirt. Not even the most idealistic pacifist seriously thinks that the South American revolutions of the mid-century could have happened so quickly without a significant amount of violence. However, as the Independent Institute points out, Che seemed to relish in the bloodshed, making clear in his Message to the Tricontinental that successful revolution required hatred as an element of struggle, unbending hatred for the enemy, which pushes a human being beyond his natural limitations, making him into an effective, violent, selective, and cold-blooded killing machine. In his diary, as the Huffington Post reports, Che referred to South America's black population as those magnificent examples of the African race who have maintained their racial purity thanks to their lack of an affinity with bathing. He and Fidel Castro established labor and concentration camps in Cuba after the revolution for anyone needing to correct their anti-social behavior, like capitalists, Afro-Cuban priests, and homosexuals. When setting up the new regime in Cuba and rooting out remaining anti-revolutionary elements, Che's orders were simple: if in doubt, kill him. Thomas Edison murdered an elephant. Thomas Edison has over 1,000 patents to his name and is described by the Library of Congress as one of the most famous and prolific inventors of all time. The influence he had on the fields of electric power generation and mass communication affected the lives and livelihoods of billions of people. The advances he and his company made in sound recording and motion pictures created entirely new mediums for entertainment, changing human leisure time forever. Thomas Edison's innovative spirit also manifested itself in shockingly terrible ways, however. For instance, his petty greed led him to become one of the Internet's favorite villains for, if for no other reason, how he screwed over Nikola Tesla. Edison's ego and ambition also drove him to compete against another bright American inventor, George Westinghouse. Edison's company produced direct current (DC) machines, while Westinghouse manufactured alternating current (AC). Edison started a slander campaign against AC, claiming that it was dangerous. To prove the point, Edison encouraged the use of electricity in executions, a procedure he called being Westinghoused. After a demonstration in which he electrocuted a dog, as related by Smithsonian Magazine, Edison told a reporter that electricity is a reliable form of death, but the current should come from an alternating machine. Edison went on to stage live events to showcase the lethality of his AC executions using horses, cattle, and one condemned elephant named Topsy. Bodica committed mass murder in the 1st century CE. The Roman Empire was near the zenith of its power. In Britain, the Celtic Iceni tribe were nominal allies of Rome, but according to the Roman historians Tacitus and Cassius Dio, when the king died, Rome annexed the tribe, violently confiscating the wealth and properties of the leading Iceni families. The king's wife, Bodica, contested the Roman claims. Roman legions attacked her village and, as Tacitus records, as a beginning, his widow Bodica was flogged and their daughters raped. That's when Bodica went full Daenerys Targaryen on the Romans. Paying taxes to their conquerors, seeing their young men conscripted to the military that oppressed them, and watching their ancestral lands and properties regularly taken, the Celts already hated the Romans. So the brutal and indecent treatment of 2 Iceni princesses by the Romans made raising an army of allied Celts fairly easy for Bodica. She gathered the tribes, and as Cassius Dio tells us, 2 cities were sacked, 80,000 of the Romans and of their allies perished, and the island was lost to Rome. Archaeological evidence clearly shows not only that battles were fought at the cities of Camulodunum, modern Colchester, Londinium, London, and Verulamium, St. Albans, in 60 or 61 CE, but that they were destroyed and every one of their inhabitants murdered. These were not flammable buildings, archaeologist Philip Crummy told The Guardian, but they were leveled. It was a murderous, determined, intensive and deliberate attack. P. T. Barnum exploited slaves. According to author Robert Wilson, P. T. Barnum probably never said his most famous aphorism, "There's a sucker born every minute," but his business model certainly encapsulated it. P. T. Barnum spent decades as the greatest showman the world had yet seen, fooling the public and exploiting his workers. In his museum and traveling circus, Barnum showcased the most outlandish specimens of biological diversity that he could find, or manufacture. The Fiji mermaid, for instance, drew huge crowds to what was actually the head and torso of a baby monkey sewn to a fish tail and covered with papier-mâché. Possibly his most underhanded, yet hilarious, bit of fraudulence was the sign in his New York museum saying, "This way to the egress." Many patrons didn't know that egress was just another word for exit, and would walk out of the building and have to pay full price to re-enter. Barnum's most callous exhibition was also his first. Barnum leased an elderly slave woman, Joyce Heth, claiming her to be the 161-year-old former nurse of George Washington. When Heth died in 1836, Barnum hosted an autopsy of her body in a New York saloon, charging 50 cents per person to watch. Smithsonian Magazine reports that Barnum, true to form, tried to rewrite history later in life, claiming he was not a racist. But as Barnum biographer Benjamin Reese explains, with Barnum you never know if that's part of the act. Queen Victoria was a spiteful and controlling mother. Queen Victoria had 9 children and 42 grandchildren, many of whom entered European royal families. Queen Elizabeth II and her husband Prince Philip are both her great-great-grandchildren. But Victoria was not maternal. For starters, she hated being pregnant. It interfered with her ability to rule, and according to the BBC, she experienced postnatal depression. She also wrote that she found babies ugly. None of this makes Victoria a terrible person, but the way she treated her children might. Ironically, the child she treated the worst was the one that she most needed as queen. The future Edward VII was a huge disappointment to both his parents because he struggled with his father Prince Albert's strict education system. The BBC reported that Victoria also mocked his appearance and intellect. Worse, after Albert died shortly after visiting Edward to deal with his affair with an actress, she blamed Edward for her beloved husband's death. She wrote, "I never can or shall look at him without a shudder," and refused to involve him in matters of state. Her other children didn't fare much better. Victoria either ignored them or was unbearably controlling, trying to prevent them from leaving home. She banned her youngest daughter Beatrice from marrying, stopped speaking to her when she did, and eventually made the newlyweds live with her. She sent spies to monitor her grown children's activities, interfered with their parenting decisions, and called Vicky's pregnancy horrid news. Charles Dickens tried to send his wife to an insane asylum. Charles Dickens' long-lasting fame comes partly from his era-defining stories and partly from his work bringing to light the plight of the poor, especially children, who had a rough time in Victorian England. But Dickens himself wasn't exactly warm-hearted and generous in his personal life. Dickens married Catherine Hogarth, the daughter of his editor George Hogarth, in 1833, according to the BBC, and they ultimately had 10 children together. But it appears that Dickens may still have been holding a candle for his first love, Maria Beadnell, whom he had tried to win over when he was a penniless 18-year-old reporter. The Guardian reports that in 1855, Dickens started writing to Beadnell, reiterating his undying love for her. But when they met in person, he described her as fat, and ended their correspondence. Lucky escape, Maria. Dickens betrayed Hogarth again in 1857, with longer-term results. That's when the then 46-year-old celebrity author started seeing 18-year-old actress Ellen, Nellie, Tarrant in secret. In 1858, he forced Hogarth out of their house and they legally separated, a very unusual move for the time. However, the cheating isn't the worst thing Dickens did to Hogarth. Letters written by a family friend and a story from Hogarth's aunt revealed that Dickens tried to have his wife shut up in a mental asylum, which would have been a deeply terrifying experience in the Victorian era. It makes pre-Ghost Scrooge seem kind. Albert Einstein was cruel to his first wife. Mastering relativity doesn't make you an expert at relationships. Albert Einstein was a legend in the lab but a misery at home. Einstein's relationship with his first wife Mileva Maric started out like the kind of love story that gets turned into a glossy Hollywood biopic. According to the New York Times, they met as students at the Zurich Polytechnic Institute in 1896, where Maric was the only female physics student. Einstein disobeyed his mother to court Maric, and the two had an illegitimate daughter, Lieserl, in 1902, who either died or was adopted. They married in 1903 and had 2 more children, Hans Albert and Eduard. The problems may have started in 1912, when Einstein began an affair with his cousin Elsa. He was cruel about Maric in letters, describing her as an employee whom I cannot fire. In July 1914, Einstein wrote a list of demands for marriage, including doing his laundry, cooking his meals, and expecting no affection from me. They separated that year, and marriage had a breakdown. Einstein and Elsa married in 1919, the year his theory of general relativity was published. Einstein continued to have affairs throughout his second marriage. Marich's relationship with Einstein may also have cost her own career in physics. Exactly how involved she was in his work is in dispute, but after they married it was expected that she would focus her attention on being a housewife and mother. Thomas Jefferson enslaved over 600 people. Although Thomas Jefferson publicly claimed to oppose slavery, The Guardian reports that he personally enslaved 607 people throughout his life, freeing only 5, and only after his death, via his will. It was their unpaid labor and lack of freedom that powered Jefferson's vast plantation, Monticello, which provided the resources that made it possible for him to become a politician. Jefferson spoke out against slavery on a political and intellectual level. He not only described it as a moral depravity, he labeled it one of the most destructive forces facing the newly formed America. He tried to introduce legislation that he believed would eventually lead to the end of slavery. Jefferson argued that a gradual approach to emancipation was necessary, and that white people were naturally superior to black people. One of the most infamous aspects of Jefferson's history as a slaveholder is his relationship with Sally Hemings, an enslaved person at Monticello with whom he had at least 6 children. This was first made public in a newspaper in 1802, although it had always been known by Hemings' descendants, and was confirmed by DNA in 1998. Jefferson apologists like to romanticize the Hemings-Jefferson relationship. But the fact is that Hemings, who was a teenager when then 40-something Jefferson initiated their sexual relationship, was not free to decide whether it happened or not. Jefferson's slave-holding and abuse are as much as part of his history as his achievements. Pablo Picasso caused misery for the women in his life. If there's one person who is most responsible for alerting the general public to the long-ignored scumminess of Pablo Picasso, it's comedian Hannah Gadsby. Her Netflix special Nanette involved a magnificent takedown of the artist over his abuse of women, and the culture that's been letting him get away with it. Gadsby specifically called out then 45-year-old Picasso's sexual relationship with a 17-year-old, Marie-Thérèse Walter, and that's just the tip of the horrible iceberg when it comes to Picasso's misogyny. His granddaughter Marina Picasso wrote of his treatment of women: once they were bled dry, he would dispose of them. The Guardian reported that Picasso enjoyed watching Walter physically fight his other girlfriend, surrealist photographer Dora Maar, who was 30 years his junior. He also drew pictures that showed someone who looked a lot like Walter being sexually assaulted by a minotaur figure that represented himself. According to the Paris Review, he told his mistress after Maar, artist Françoise Gallot, "Women are machines for suffering." He also threatened to throw Gallot from a bridge, and burned her with a cigarette. Gallot was 21 and Picasso 65 when they began their affair, according to The New York Times. After they broke up, Picasso tried to ruin her reputation, but Gallot was undeterred. She later wrote a searing memoir about their relationship, and turned 98 in 2019. Walter was not so lucky. She committed suicide, as did Picasso's second wife, Jacqueline.